Welcome to Tabletop Gaming Guild. Tabletop Gaming Guild is all about the experiences and memories that playing games with friends and families can create. Today we'll be looking at a tabletop RPG called Mork Borg. Mork Borg is designed by Pelle Nielsen and art is by Johan Noor. This is published by Occult Workmaster Games. Mork Borg has kindly been provided to us by Free League Publishing, which gives us a lot of awesome RPGs to try, and the art in this game is fantastic. If you want to understand the theme of this game, I would say think Metalocalypse combined with Dark Souls. So it's a really dark apocalyptic theme that focuses on extreme violence, gore. It is very easy to die in this game, but there's also a lot of rules for permanent damage, dismemberment, horrible things to happen that you will survive. So death is not necessarily the worst thing you can encounter in this game. One of the really nice things about this game, for me in particular, as an inexperienced RPG player, I've never personally run an RPG, and I'm interested in running this because it is very rules light. If you look at the end of this rulebook, there is a single page sheet that goes over pretty much every rule a player needs to know. I mean, there's a little bit more detail beyond this, but it's once I go introduce the concepts and the rules, they can use this throughout the game and quickly have an idea what's going on. It also makes it lighter on the DM by requiring the characters to do almost all the rolling. It's very rare that the DM does any rolling in this game. For example, in combat, monsters automatically attack, and the characters roll for the defense, rather than the DM having to determine how the monster attacks and whether they hit or not. So let's jump back up. I just want to look at these Occult Treasures, because they kind of give you quickly a feel of this game. So if you just look at the descriptions of some of these treasures you can pick up. Ashen gray ring, a finger width wide. All that passes through it are obliterated. So it's just a random treasure you can pick up, and if you put it on, you've just lost that finger. Everything can be bad for it. Just picking up the wrong item can have serious consequences. The second one's a more evocative item. The keening of this small vile flute animates a fetus-sized meat golem in a nearby corpse. I'm particularly interested in some of these items, but I may run this game at some point, so I don't want to spoil it for my players. The only downside to this, for our purposes, is this being a graphically intense game. Even though it's like theater of the mind, it still can be pretty intense. And being we are a family-friendly channel, and I don't want to water this down, I'm not sure if we'd be able to air a playthrough of this RPG. I'll likely run a playthrough of this. We'll see, and then we'll see from there how it goes. Okay, continuing on, similar to the items, you can plunder corpses, but you may or may not actually get anything good. You may suffer some serious damage from this action. The body may be coated in acid that burns to the touch. You may stick your hand in a bag of angry venomous moth, or you might unleash a hopeless amount of spiders. A lot of the descriptions were along this lines, minimalistic, basically giving you a sense of where you could go with this, but allowing you the freedom to express it in the way you want. Given that I don't want to go too much into the lore, I'll just give you a general sense of the background. It's definitely a dark, post-apocalyptic, or rather, mid-apocalypse story. There is a pair of double-headed basilisks that are each head is constantly arguing with each other, and these are practically godlike creatures. One of these heads in particular has foretold many events leading to the end of the world, destruction, and everything seems to be going in that path. All his predictions so far have been correct, and many people have fully bought into his predictions, and some have given up, some have just said, we'll do what we can with what time we got left. RPG seems highly encouraging to not focus so much on the rules, but on the storytelling and taking the game where you want it to go. And if we go back to these items, they give you charge to roll for items, for traps, for weather, for naming characters, which I know most RPGs do give you this as an optional tool, but Mork Borg seems to, in my impression, encourage this to embrace the chaos of randomization. So not even the DM necessarily knows what's going to happen next. Enhancing that feeling of the unexpected, horrible things happening that you just didn't see coming, into the shock of that. Of course, the book goes into some of the various locations you can visit. Some of the things that are happening there, all very sinister, very world-ending, and obviously some of the people you can encounter in those locations. If you're interested, yeah, get this book, read through it, enjoy this art, enjoy this theme. Let's talk about this calendar. I mentioned earlier the one head of the basilisk, Veru, is the one that predicted the end of the world. He predicted the 7 miseries. The 7th misery ends the world, breaking the 7th seal, and the game ends and everyone dies. You're then instructed to burn this book. I don't know how many people are actually going to do that, but we'll see. Well, we won't see. I'm not going to burn this book. So you can kind of set how long you want the campaign to be using this calendar system, and you're basically periodically rolling to see if a new misery appears. Then we're getting into character creation. Like all RPGs, it does have options for pre-generated characters or classes you can go on, but this presents that as the optional rule as opposed to the primary. Like many of the things, it seems to encourage the randomness, so rolling to see what you start with, rolling to see how much money you get, what equipment, how much food. There's a possibility on the D6 you could get nothing. Not great. And so here's how you create a character, though. Go to this page, randomize your starting equipment, roll to randomize your weapon armor, roll for your abilities, roll for hit points, and then you may want to name your character, but it may not last long, so. And then here's what I was talking about. You have the option of starting with a class and starting with different items based on those starts. But it does definitely encourage you to be random. After you roll for your starting equipment, you would then roll for the weapons listed here. Then for your armor, which is down here, you roll a d4, and if you roll a 1, you just start with no armor. Bad luck for you. If you have magic power, or aka scrolls, you can't start with this heavier armor. So you only roll a d2. They do seem to use d2s a lot in this game, which I'm not thrilled with. And d4s quite a bit too, but if you're doing this on Roll20 or something like that, where you can just digitally represent the dice, that's not a big issue. A little harder with physical dice, you just have to do a little math, but not a big deal. So these are prices, so it's 20... I forget what the term they use for money is, not really important. This is other equipment that's available to buy. You can get all sorts of basic equipment, you get all sorts of weapons, basic prices for things you can get in town, basically your amenities. And apparently bribing is quite a big deal in this. Armor does degrade, you have to repair it. Abilities. You really only have 4 stats. You have agility, presence, strength, and toughness. Agility relates to defense and anything related to mobility or movement checks. Presence is all about awareness and interaction with others, so it affects your perception, your ranged combat, whether it's through magic or physical weapons, as well as interacting with people. Strength, pretty straightforward. Toughness is related to health and surviving. So you're going to be rolling 3d6 for each of these stats, and then totaling it to get what your modifier is for that stat. If you do not choose one of the optional classes, you would take 2 of those stats and roll 4d6, and then drop the lowest number. Capped at +6. Okay, tests. Pretty straightforward test system. Everything's given a difficulty rating based on the pretty standard No, is it something anybody can do? If it's something that a normal person can do, this is something that shouldn't even be possible. Carrying capacity. Does anybody really use carrying capacity in RPGs? Okay, hit points. This is also pretty interesting. So you're going to roll for your hit points. You're going to take your toughness and roll a d8. The only problem with that is if you roll really low and have a negative, and then you roll a d8, it is technically possible to have below 0. So this has to state, worst case you get 1 HP. Starting in a brutal world like this with 1 HP, that isn't good. If you ever hit 0 HP, you are considered broken and have to roll for effects, which does include possible dismemberment or instant death. And if you're at negative points, you are dead. Combat. You got a 1-page combat reference. This goes through everything you need to know about combat. Initiatives are really simple. You roll a d6, and that determines whether the enemies go first or the PCs, and then the PCs, or player characters, individually roll for their initiative. So, DM only has to roll 1 die. He doesn't have to determine individual initiative for each monster in the encounter. They're just grouped. Base combat is always the same difficulty rating. Certain monsters will modify that, but for the most part it sticks to that, and it's more about what special abilities they tack on to those monsters. So but for the most part, you're not fighting crazy strong monsters. There's a few of them out there, but you're dealing with varying numbers of moderate to difficult monsters. If you're doing melee, you roll your strength test. If you're doing ranged attacks, you're doing presence tests. Every turn when an enemy attacks you, you roll agility. The key takeaway here for the DM is once initiative is rolled, the DM doesn't have to roll any more dice, and he doesn't actually have to decide what attacks because each monster has its preset attacks. So they can focus on the storytelling, feeling free to give very visceral descriptions of the combat if they so desire. Rolling crits. Again, they keep it pretty straightforward. You just double the damage, and whatever the defense rating of the creature is reduced by 1. In defense, if you roll a crit, you get to counterattack. Rolling a natural 1 means you've just lost or broken that weapon that you may have just spent a lot of money on. And if you roll a natural 1 in defense, it's as if the enemy has critted you. Last thing in combat is morale. Most monsters will run away under certain conditions. If you take out the leader, you take out half their group, or they're very low on health. They will have a chance of running away. Resting, pretty standard. When you rest, you just roll a d6. That's how much health you get back. You do need to try to eat every time you rest, or eventually you'll start starving. Reaction is more... This is really for random encounters. If you have a creature that may or may not be hostile to you, you can roll to see if they are, or how hostile they are. Leveling up is where this takes a turn, because leveling up may not always be good. So, early on, chances are pretty good that you'll be increasing every time you level up. Where you're rolling a 60-10, and if that roll is higher than your current HP, you're going to increase your HP by a d6. When you level up, you also get random goods, items, money or scrolls, and your abilities can level up, potentially. You roll a d6 for every ability. If it's better, you increase it by 1. But, if you roll below your ability, you decrease it. For new players, though, if you have really low stats, they just pretty much automatically increase. Powers are your spell types, and this is all based on scrolls, and there's a whole bunch of scrolls you can pick up, and you usually roll for what type of scrolls you get, and use presence to cast them. But, similar to the Arkham games, negative things can happen if you fail on your spellcasting roll, and the GM can decide whether to improvise that result or use the table and have you roll for some really nasty effects. So these are the horrible things that could happen if your spell fails. And anything on italics is things that the character doesn't necessarily know about. So if you roll a 1, your teeth fall out. So simply rolling a 1, your teeth fall out and are replaced by fingernails. Some of them are just more thematic. Some of them are really have serious game effects, like having to roll toughness or lose 10 HP. Then you got a small short list of spells that you can possibly have, and generally rolling a d10 to figure out what spells you've got. And there's 2 types of spells, classes of spells. There's unclean scrolls, which are definitely damage heavy, often have worse negative effects associated with them. Death is just crazy. If you roll 10, all creatures within 30 feet lose a total of 40-10 HP. Bear in mind, it says all creatures. Doesn't specify your allies, doesn't specify enemies, just all creatures. Sacred Scrolls generally focus on healing and helpful abilities. Omens. Omens differ based on whether you chose classes or not. Without classes, you're rolling a d2. Every time you rest, you get new omens. So omens are boons, essentially, such as increases your damage output, lowering the difficulty on all tests. Unlike everything else, omens you get to choose. You just rolling to see how many you get. These are one-time uses, so you may want to save them for when you really need them, but you don't want to wait too long and end up dying. Then we got some optional charts. These are mainly rolling for negative characteristics, whether they're mental or physical for your character, that really mainly just help with RP. These are completely optional just to help you flesh out your character if you so choose to use them. Okay, then we're getting into the optional classes. I don't want to go into too much. They're pretty minimalist. They don't go into a whole lot of detail. You just get a little kind of brief description of what the class is, what you need to roll for your starting money and equipment, and abilities specific to that class. Just roll to see for that. Then you can roll for a little bit for your background. There's a number of different classes. There's 6 basic classes you can start with. Creatures. How much health they have, how much morale, so how likely they are to run away. They're defensive, so how much they can modify hits. Their attack value, if they hit, they're rolling a d4. This one in particular is harder to hit and harder to defend against because it's fast moving. We have prices here for the value if you turn them in. So if they turn in your head, it's 7 money, but if you capture them, it's 158 money. Okay, and this is where we get into the specials, and a lot of them have special things. So in this one, if he does hit you, he can cause an infection that every day you lose health until you are managed to heal that infection. You also cannot rest and heal while you're infected. So while this is not a particularly dangerous enemy in itself, it can be a huge long-term detriment. Okay, and there's a number of other basic monsters you can encounter. Obviously, you can make your own if you want. Just read this to show you how dark it can get. Defamers and corrupt clerks suffer a punishment of exquisite and deeply impractical cruelty. Their children or grandchildren are encased in porcelain dolls and then placed in cathedral windows to die slowly of starvation and heat. Despite warding rituals, many return as vengeful undead, often gathering in large throngs to hunt their tormentors. Their mad gaze demands a presence D12 test. Start of combat to avoid being frozen with fear for D4 rounds. You can also have followers. The key thing with followers is that they're helpful, but you have to keep them happy. That you roll for their traits, roll for what they're good at, but you also roll for what they find important. The DM will roll periodically to see if they continue to follow you, and they will also factor in how well you fulfill those things, satisfy those things that character values. So that's the basic rules for Mork Borg. It also does come with an Introductory Dungeon you can run through that I would like to try this. It kind of maps, it gives you some random encounters you can have. It gives you a nice map, description, very brief description of each room. The text is minimal but very evocative and very easy to work with, giving you a lot of ability to put effort into your description and giving you the freedom to do that. They're not trying to say, this is what it looks like. This is 100% the way you have to describe it. They're giving you just kind of a feel and letting you describe it how you want. That's the general idea. It also gives you some extra resources if you want to give a little more motivation to the characters. You can roll for who they know, why they're out in the world, what their goals are. If you're trying to build an encounter on your own, gives you some options for help you name things, help you decide what to put in those areas, anything, distinctive features, things like that, what kind of threats and how to describe rooms, what you can put in rooms. It does it in a very quick and concise way. And then again, we have the cheat sheet that goes through everything that character needs to know. And I really like the fact that they have the index in the front and back. So it's like easy to get back to where you need to be. It's easy to find the stuff you need. You want combat? There's combat, page 29. In short, Mork Borg looks easy to learn, easy to play, and focused on story and evocative descriptions. Well, thank you for watching. As always, you can catch us here on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, anywhere podcasts can be found, and many other social medias. And please don't forget to like and subscribe.